Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. What a weekend of Call of Duty action we have had so far. OpTic Texas confirming their #1 seed status going into Major 4 in Columbus in just a few days time. But also the big story to me is Vegas Legion confirming a 4-in-1 run. What a performance they've had, catching up and now overtaking the Minnesota Rokkr in the standings for the World Championship qualification. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all though, the London versus New York subliner series, there was this guy that got a tattoo on his hand, and even as Ravens say, it's not the worst CDL related tattoo we have seen this week. Talking of course to Mr. Scrappy and the lion tattoo he got, and I'm sure there'll be discussions about that for some time to come, but he likes it, so you know, he's not going to care what people think. But if Toronto's performances continue to slide, memes will continue to emerge. But today was the subliner's turn to take down London Royal Ravens. Again at London, right, the thing with this team is, they're not far off being quite good, and we've seen it for them quite a lot lately, to be honest. Nasty was frying map 1, but Hydra, when push came to shove, was delivering the goods. I mean, I think London went up here, what, 70 to like 10, and then they got maybe 50 points for the rest of the game. Like, it was actually absurd when Hydra decided to turn up. Priest had a rough start, he turned it around a little bit, but not significantly, but it was Hydra who just won them the game. 250 to like 130, wasn't even particularly close. The Search and Destroy does go the way of London in the end. Fair play to them for bouncing back in the series, but as I say, when it comes down to the wire, you can pretty much always rely on London to come out on the worst end of things. They lose the control, and then they lose the hard point as well. Again, like, London could have potentially sent this 5 and made it interesting, but no, subliners win it, and it's that point of the season where you will start to see, or continue to see, the better teams really put the worst teams in the dirt here in situations like this. And look, another close hard point defeat for London. They've done it again, and subliners get their 10 points on the board. And even as subliners say, Ravens' development over the last few years hasn't been so pretty, right? 2020, it was looking pretty good. They made the World Championship weekends that year. So there was the World Champs, and then there was the Championship weekends. Only 4 teams made it. London was one of those teams. The last few years, they've been getting worse and worse, and this year it's been pretty much terrible. Bad decisions being made. Afro, of course, left to go to the Minnesota Rokkr, and maybe Nasty should follow him kind of soon, to be honest, because the team isn't looking good. Feel bad for iLLeY coming into this mess, and admittedly, the breaking point scoreboard here was kind of wrong on first run, and it looked like iLLeY had about 220 odd deads, so he had a 0.2 KD. That was a typo. He still had a 0.8 though, and yeah, you know, Nasty Scraps got the numbers, but not the results fundamentally, and Hydra at 1.36, that's just what he does, bailing out Priester for a pretty weak series on his half, as we've seen a fair few ARs have as of late, it's got to be said. This though was the most exciting series to me of the day, just because it had so many implications if Vegas were to win or to lose. Game 1 came round, Standy had the sleeveless jersey on, I believe Temp did a similar thing. Okay, the jersey isn't sleeveless, but he was trying to make it so, enhancing the Doug Sensimartin energy, and you know, he was hoping of course that wouldn't make him for 1.7 KD, but it wasn't the case. Standy fried this series yet again, as it did against Toronto. Game 1 though, Florida win, and this is the thing, right? Florida aren't particularly good. They're going to lose a lot of series like this, but they really took it close against Vegas. And it's funny with Vegas, I feel like every team that Vegas play right now in the entire world, in the Pro League at least, right, apart from maybe OpTic that they'd probably get blown out by, I think they could go game 5 with like anyone. And that is not just, you know, a credit to them talking about how good they could be against a Thieves or a Toronto or, you know, Surge, FaZe, as we have seen recently the results they've had, but it's also on the negative end, right? They can go game 5 with anybody. They can go game 5 with Florida, LAG, London. Obviously, they lost to London, right? Which was, I mean, imagine the only loss they have this stage is to London. Can you believe it? So anyway, they go down game 1 to Florida, but, and their hard one is still very questionable, but they do have, it's interesting in the communication and stuff you go into them with. It doesn't seem, you know, exactly what a successful team environment would sound like, but it does work for them, and their Search and Destroy is great. Clay hits this no-scope that you guys have seen about 50 million times at this point, and then it goes down to a round 11, and this was an absurd round 11 because Brack finds himself in a 1 versus 2. This might be one of the biggest 1v1s Clay wins in his career if it goes the way that it might well do if Vegas were to make the World Championship. It's a 1v1, 33 seconds on the bomb. Brack is snaking, and he is snaking hard. There was even discussions about this, loads of discussions about this. We might dive into it in more detail tomorrow, actually, because there was quite a lot to say, and Brack just kept on going. I mean, what's he meant to do? Clay isn't really throwing too many snakes that he can try, but like, Brack eventually decides to take some shots. He gets a little bit impatient, and he loses the gunfight, but that is criminal behavior, right? Like, look at, I mean, I don't really want to share it again, it's too ugly to witness, but this is the game we're playing here, is it Infinity Ward, that we're just snaking forever here in the kitchen, and there's really nothing CleanX can do until Brack decides to actually stop snake and go for the kill. If he'd have snaked for another 10 seconds, which he could have done, and just done it forever, CleanX would really have had no option than to eventually chow and get caught off guard. So, I mean, yeah, body shots, and for good reason here. Game 2, round 11, CleanX comes up massive with the 1v1 win, and ensures Vegas go into a third map with an even situation. They certainly needed it, right, given their control woes. But even as Doug says, this is actually pathetic. Please do something to fix the broken mechanics moving forward. I'm sure it's not easy, but the reality is our game was better 10 years ago because things like this couldn't happen. I mean, it's just outrageous. I don't want to even watch it anymore, to be honest. Then, though, we get to game 3. And again, Vegas get the job done. And this is a very promising sign for you Legion fans out there, of which there are actually quite a few this season rooting for this storyline. Because, I mean, look, they were terrible at Fortress. They would always lose it. They lost to Marky B, for goodness sake. And they were bad at Hotel and LSELO and that stuff as well. Now Expo is in, though. They're actually quite competitive on this map. The couple of times they've played it so far, they've looked kind of good. Okay, they still choke some situations. Their control is far from flawless. But they won another control here against Florida. And this is massive, right? If they could win, as I said yesterday, 40% of controls, like, they'll be good to go the distance because they're going to be competitive with most teams in hardpoints and they're going to win a lot of search and destroys. That's the way this team is. And then, though, we go to the final map of the series. Standy was going off it. The slaying it was mega in Vegas's favor. I don't know how they didn't win this series or this map more comfortably, to be honest. It ended up being like 250, 247. It's a super tight end to the game, or like P2 or whatever it is. So, yeah, but Standy went big here towards the end. Big moments from all involved, to be honest. TJ didn't have the greatest numbers, but Temp, Standy, Clay, they all had their standout moments here. In Florida, they fall short. They gave it a decent shot, to be honest, but it just wasn't enough. And even as, yeah, they say here, we need new team kits ASAP, with Temp also rocking the sleeveless jersey attempt. And then as Clay says, love my boy. Of course, that's fellow, right? Haven't played him in a long time. 1-3-1, finished stage 4 qualifying with a 4-in-1 record. This is, I think, realistically for Vegas, the best they could have wanted, right? You come into this stage, you're playing Boston, you're playing Toronto. The other series against London, Florida and Guerrillas, you'd think you should win, as they did, apart from the London one. You'd think that you'd lose one of the Boston or Toronto series at least. So, okay, whatever. They lost to London, who cares? To go 4-in-1 is still a great result. They would have loved 5-0, but, you know, 4-in-1, all things considered, is probably the best they could have realistically asked for. And Temp was having a rather good time as soon as this series concluded. So, yeah, great story for Vegas. And that now leaves them at 130 points. The Minnesota Rokkr play Los Angeles Thieves tomorrow. If they win that, they'll go back to 140. But I believe based on placements and whatever exactly the kind of head-to-head record is, right now, Vegas, I believe, are getting put in the 8th position and Rokkr in 9th. So, you know, it's really awesome to see that they have made that gap happen. Now, fundamentally, Rokkr have an easier time in stage 5. And both teams will be starting in winners, but a 4-in-1 record for Vegas does mean that they actually have a very solid seeding, right? They're going to be a 2nd or 3rd seed for the major. That's a really positive step for them. And also, it's the first ever time they've made winners bracket. Last stage, they had a great chance. They squandered it right to the death. And this stage, they've done it. 4-in-1. This is the thing. We talk about Clay and sometimes the comms. Maybe he's holding the team back at times in the comms and stuff. But then you think, look, Vegas were never, or Legion were never competitive at all for the last several years, really. Okay, Modern Warfare, they had a bit of a stint where the Paris team was okay with the Australian guys. But since then, it's been a shambles. Clay comes in, has turned this team into what it is, making winners brackets now, which is, you know, unheard of for Legion. And they're really mixing it up with Minnesota here for this final World Championship spot. Now, got to quickly mention on the Florida side, though, as Major Maniac says, it's almost like things play out exactly how I say they will. Florida 0-5. Shambles, fallen off a cliff. Not really a surprise to many. I know that when this team was changed, we thought, well, they're going to get worse in search, might be marginally better in the respawns, which I think is probably true and has worked out as it has. Obviously, the Havoc situation isn't ideal for them, but yeah, still another write-off year for Florida, and I don't even really know what their future plans are, given that do they really have like too much young talent to build around there? They could build around Cap and stuff and maybe Vickle, but it doesn't really seem like the right idea to me. So another disaster class of a season from them, but at least Vegas are trying to do things right. And look at the numbers here, right? Standy 1.3, Temp 1.2, Clay 1.2, dominant slaying actually across those 3 guys over this series. Really impressive stuff, and a 3-1 result for the Vegas Legion. And Vegas's 4-in-1 was unlikely to be enough for a number 1 seed, but it maybe could have got them relatively close. But OpTic were always going to be ahead of them regardless of what happened in this series, and it did indeed go their way. Game 1 again, Shotzzy and the entire OpTic team in the respawns are unbelievably good. And I've got to say, there is Dallas Empire. There is a feeling of the Dallas Empire about this team, the way they play some of the hard points, right? right? Like, we remember the previous OpTic teams. They would have to outslay by a lot to try and win. Last year in Vanguard, if they wanted to win a Bacage hardpoint, they had to outslay by a good 10-15 kills. They were not winning on fundamentals last year. They haven't been a team that's done that for ages. This now is a fundamentally sound team. They play well off each other, and you know, it almost reminds me a bit of the Shotzzy and Huke used to get back in the day on the Dallas Empire teams with Crimsix, where they would often get outslayed in the series or go pretty much even. The ARs might even go negative, but they would still win, sometimes even pretty comfortably, despite getting less kills than the opposition. That is just indicative of incredibly good team play. And when you've got a team like OpTic with the gunny they have, now with the fundamentals, like, that's a very scary proposition. It does feel like Ghosty has been able to unlock that to a certain extent. So Shotzzy was going off game 1. They won the game 1 pretty comfortably in the end of Mikado, and that put them 7-0 in hardpoint this stage. Pretty unbelievable record to think about it, right? Not losing a hardpoint the entire stage so far. Very challenging to do, but it's exactly what OpTic Texas have done so far. What a great result from them. And even in the search and destroy here, right? Again, a pretty dominant showing, it's got to be said. Huke made a nice play here to catch off Beans. Beans, you know, he was dominant against OpTic when they played at their home series, but since then hasn't been super good. Boston are still an okay team, but against OpTic, they're never quite going to be right there. Crump, though, did have a really stand at map 3, which we'll definitely dive into in a second, because I thought OpTic were going to close this out in 3, and if they had have done, they'd have gone for a 15-2 map count, which would have been remarkable. There was a chance they closed out round 1 here, but Ghosty naded his teammate in Shotzzy, as he loves to do, and that gave Boston the win. And then Crimp went off on the final few rounds here, dropped, what, 38 kills or something like that at the end. So he had a great map and performance. Ghosty had a really hard time, but there is a caveat for that. We'll see here in a second. Boston do win the control, and I think for OpTic fans, they'll probably be quite happy that this team is losing some maps here, because they'll still know and look back at this series thinking, alright, our hardpoint's undefeated right now, but our control still has some work to do. There is some issues with OpTic's control. It's not exactly perfect, but OpTic go to a map 4 hardpoint, and map 4 hardpoint, it's a hardpoint. You know what's going to happen. OpTic end up winning it, again, pretty comfortably. Dashy went off, and this was what was so impressive to me about OpTic this series, was that Shotzzy and Huke didn't have a crazy series. They had great moments individually, they made some great plays, like they had some highlight clips and stuff at Shotzzy especially, but the slaying was done by Dashy, and we haven't seen that lately. Dashy's been taking a back seat with the other guys stepping up, but when they have a bit of a slower series statistically, Dashy's there to pick up the slack. He drops a 1.25. Now, I know that Ghosty was saying that there was sun shining in his eyes, the Zoomer thing that happened with his 4-23 back in the day, so maybe a caveat for why Ghosty had a 0.7 in this series. And apparently JP was actually trying to shield the light from Ghosty rather than actually watch the game, but they get the job done in the end. A 3-1 result against Boston. Major 4 up next, and that leaves, we'll look at the kind of results here, or the scoreboard in a second. OpTic at 5-0. This is before the FaZe versus Surge series we'll discuss tomorrow, but OpTic 15-3. That is close to the all-time record. I believe that I thought FaZe held the record at 15-2 in Stage 4 Cold War, but apparently Toronto might have even got a 15-1 that year. So regardless, it was close to the all-time record. The first time in over a year at this point, pretty much. At least it hasn't happened so far this year in Modern Warfare 2 that a team has actually gone 5-0. And as a result, they will surely here be going into the major as favourites. And that's what I'm saying about Dashy. A 1.22 in this series. Most damage on his team. Not quite the most in the lobby. There was some good slaying coming out of the Boston guys, but just an impressive result. OpTic to win this 3-1 with some comfortable hardpoint wins, and these are the slaying numbers. Okay, there's a little bit of Boston not doing so much with their kills, but also there's OpTic playing some fundamentally sound COD. So very much enjoy to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.